Okay, everybody. So today I am happy to welcome to the podcast Kevin Tracey. So start off a little bit by introducing yourself to us and telling us a little bit about who are you and what makes you want to come on and talk about what your areas of expertise with the people that are listening here to this podcast, Autoimmune Rehab.
Well, first, thank you, Anna, for having me on. It's great to be here. I have been working for the past 40 years on questions of inflammation and looking for ways to treat them. I am a neurosurgeon, but have spent most of the last 25 years actually working as the president and CEO of the Feinstein Institute at Northwell Health in New York, where I run a laboratory and oversee a research operation with 1,000 full-time researchers and 4,000 part-time researchers, or 5,000 actually, distributed across our health network, which extends from one end of New York City all the way out to the end of the tip of Long Island, out to Montauk, and now up into Westchester County and parts of Connecticut. So it's a very large health system, and we're very focused on treating our patients, of course, 2.5 million patients a year, but we're equally focused on thinking about the underlying causes of diseases and looking for ways of making new therapies, particularly in my own case, in the case of my own laboratory that I run with my colleague Sangeeta Shivan. We're very interested in looking at ways to treat patients suffering from excessive inflammation in the context of autoimmune diseases.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's good. So tell us a little bit more about how did that transition happen then? Because, it's pretty unusual that you find somebody that starts off like in a surgery field and then they all of a sudden decide to go a little more, if you will, holistic and start looking at, alternative type stuff. I mean, it definitely happens, but it doesn't happen as frequently as, maybe you might even think would be a good thing. So how did you get interested in that, making that transition over?
From as long as I can remember, my career path was to combine medicine and basic research in order to invent things, therapies that could be useful to treat human diseases. In medical school, I made the decision to pursue a career in surgery because all my life I was working in woodworking and I worked in car shops and auto body shops, and I always loved to do things with my hands. Surgery had a tremendous appeal to me, but the plan all along was for me to combine a career in basic science and in clinical medicine. When I was training to be a neurosurgeon at the New York Hospital in the early 1980s, a little girl named Janice had been crawling across the kitchen floor when her grandmother was cooking dinner. And as grandma turned to drain the boiling pot of water from cooking pasta into the sink, she stumbled over Janice, and Janice was scalded over 90% of her body with boiling water. Janice was, we treated her for a month in the burn unit at the New York Hospital, and during that time, she became a little miracle child. We actually, against all odds, began to think that maybe she would survive and go home. And I was standing in the doorway to her room one lunch hour when she was rocking in the arms of a nurse, having her lunch from a baby bottle, when her eyes rolled up in her head and she died. I ran in to the room. I put Janice into the crook of my left arm. I started CPR and gave her mouth to mouth. The nurse called a code, and the cardiac arrest went on for, it felt like hours, but it was probably 45 minutes or 60 minutes. And Janice was gone. And I couldn't believe it, because one minute she was there and the next minute she was gone. I had to tell her mother, and who fainted into a dead faint onto the floor. We picked her up and put her on a couch, and I had to go write the death note in the chart. I had to write the final medical record, and I didn't know what the cause of death was, and that haunted me. The textbook said that burn victims often die of severe infection, but we hadn't seen any evidence of infection. But I had seen that she had gone into this condition of overwhelming inflammation, which we call septic shock. And having committed myself to a path combining neurosurgery and research already at that time, I had not committed myself to a specific research project. And after the experience with Janice, I decided to pursue the question of what causes inflammation and how can it cause shock when it spreads into the bloodstream. And I joined a laboratory at Cornell, led by the head of surgery there, Dr. Tom Shires, and his colleague, Dr. Steve Lowry. And within a few months, began collaborating with a group at Rockefeller, led by Dr. Tony Cerami, which Rockefeller Institute is right next door. Rockefeller University is right next door to the New York Hospital. And I went back and forth for the subsequent 2 years. And during the course of that time, what my colleagues and I discovered was that the molecule that actually caused Janice to go into shock and die was not made by bacteria, but it was made by her own immune system. And today, you know that molecule by the name TNF. And because we understood now that TNF had the capacity to cause so much damage, we developed a monoclonal antibody and proved for the first time that when we treated baboons with these monoclonal antibodies, that we could prevent the inflammation caused by TNF. And this really laid the groundwork for the development of drugs that are widely used today, drugs like Humira and others in the biologic class that target TNF, which is, of course, a cytokine, and then later, of course, subsequently other cytokines like IL-1 and IL-6. That was really the beginning of my career, and it laid the path for us to now what we're working on today, to understand the connections between the nervous system, the brain, and the immune system, and how those signals can actually turn off inflammation.
Yeah, that's good, because the reality is that anybody that's got any kind of autoimmune condition or any kind of a serious health issue, they've got an inflammation problem. And if you're listening to this and you weren't aware of that, now you know, that you've got an inflammation problem. And yeah, that's interesting. And at the same time, I mean, it's obviously much more complicated to try to fix. There's obviously a lot of different reasons why people have it, a lot of different solutions. I noticed you have experience, with a lot of different therapies, whether that's infrared light, hyperbaric oxygen, all different kinds of things. How do you determine, and how do you recommend that somebody else would determine where it makes sense to start? In other words, they've got chronic inflammation, they know they need to fix it, but they don't know exactly how to fix it. What would you recommend should be the first thing that somebody should do?
Well, the first thing that you should do is see a specialist who treats autoimmune and autoinflammatory conditions. If it's rheumatoid arthritis, you should start with a specialist that sees a lot of patients with a rheumatologist that sees a lot of patients with rheumatoid arthritis. And if it's inflammatory bowel disease, you should start with a gastroenterologist or a gastroenterology group that has great experience treating Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis. I don't have any expertise in hyperbaric oxygen or in light therapy. Our research has focused exquisitely on the molecular basis of inflammation, and therein lies the key to understanding how to develop new therapies. So the advice to any patient is to start with what their physician would advise.
Okay, makes sense. Yeah, and actually, I just realized I was looking at the wrong bio for the wrong person, so that's why oops. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, so tell us a little bit then about what kinds of therapies and things do you have experience with then for people?
What my colleagues and I are most excited about right now is the recent FDA announcement that it's possible to implant a vagus nerve stimulator into patients with rheumatoid arthritis whose rheumatoid arthritis continues to be severe despite trying therapy with biologics blocking TNF and other cytokines. The news actually just broke last week, a few days ago. And the news is that the FDA has given approval to a company that I co-founded in 2007 called SetPoint Medical to begin marketing its device. The device is about the size of a multivitamin. It's a very small device, and it contains a small computer, a battery, an antenna to communicate with the doctor's tablet or iPad, and electrodes that sit on the vagus nerve. Once it's implanted by a neurosurgeon through a very small incision, an inch or an inch and a half long, in the left neck, the device is completely invisible. It will sit underneath the sternocleidomastoid, the strap muscles in your neck, at about the level of your Adam's apple. What's amazing is that the device is only active for about a minute a day. And what my colleagues at SetPoint and my colleagues in my laboratory have worked out over the last 25 years is that by sending this brief electric pulse into the vagus nerve, it's possible to activate what we call the inflammatory reflex, which functions like the brakes in your car to suppress or slow down or stop runaway inflammation in patients with serious rheumatoid arthritis. The clinical trial results were announced last fall, actually in November, at the American College of Rheumatology in Washington, D.C. And the summary of the results you could find on the SetPoint Medical website, or if you Google it, it's many reports of this now. But in summary, there was 242 patients, and all the patients at the beginning of the trial were implanted with the device, but only half of them had it turned on. It was randomized. And within a few months after turning on the device in the treated group, within 12 weeks, there was a significant improvement so that those patients hit the primary endpoint in what's called the American College of Rheumatology 20 score, which means their tender swollen joints got better. Now, remember, these are patients whose tender swollen joints had not gotten better on these very powerful medications, the biologics and what's called the JAK inhibitors. So it was a very significant finding, statistically significant. And then when the control population, the ones that had the device which had not yet been turned on, when those devices were turned on, they also got better in the next 12 weeks. So that by the end of 1 year, 3/4 of the patients in the trial were using as their therapy the vagus nerve stimulator, which is called an immunoregulator, and we're not requiring treatment with biologics or JAKs. And that's a really big effect. And that has a lot of people in the autoimmune world, particularly right now, rheumatoid arthritis, in the rheumatoid arthritis world, very, very excited, including me.
They should be, because a lot of the drugs, not only do they not, like you said, they aren't even working for some of these people, but they also have a lot of really bad side effects. So, the ability to be able to do something like that and not have to deal with that, that's good. So they get it. So how does that work? They get implanted. So it's like a surgery to have it implanted. And then you said it only turns on for like 1 minute a day. So how does that work? Is there like an external thing of some kind that people use to turn it on, or does it just by default only turn on for 1 minute a day?
No, it's fully programmable. So the doctor can adjust what time of day it turns on and for how long it turns on. The reason it only has to turn on for 1 minute a day is because that's sufficient to get these very significant clinical benefits. And the reason that the effects last longer than 1 minute is actually based on biology. So to explain how this works, the vagus nerve runs from your brain on both sides. You have 2 vagus nerves, and across your neck on both sides, across your chest, down into your abdomen. And along the way, it sends branches to all of the organs that you don't think about all day long. These are like, you can think of them almost as little cables or little wires that are transmitting information back and forth. Now, we say there's a vagus nerve, but I already said you have 2, like 2 thumbs, 2 kidneys. And inside of each of these 2 vagus nerves, you actually have 100,000 fibers. So there's a tremendous amount of neurological information traveling from your body and up into your brain and back, which establishes how the brain can reflexively control the function of your organs. And one of one of those organ systems that's under the control of these signals is actually your immune system, the system that of white blood cells and your spleen and your lymph nodes and other organs that actually are responsible for controlling how much inflammation is occurring in your body. So what happens when the vagus nerve stimulator, the immunoregulator, activates the inflammatory reflex in your neck for 1 minute is signals travel down the vagus nerve to the area outside your spleen, where there's a collection of nerves that then send signals into your spleen. And in the spleen, that electrical signal is converted in the nerves into a chemical signal. The chemical signals that there in the spleen that turn off the white blood cells from making TNF and IL-1 and other cytokines, those chemical signals have names like acetylcholine and norepinephrine, which are neurotransmitters. Those chemical signals continue to come out of the spleen for hours. And so what happens is the white blood cells are being quieted down. It's like the brakes on your car are being activated. And the quieting down of those white blood cells mean when the white blood cells leave the spleen and travel through the bloodstream to go to the places of inflammation, like the hands or fingers in the case of rheumatoid arthritis, they're less active and there's less inflammation. It's actually very well understood now after all the work that we've done in the laboratory. And in some ways, you can make a strong argument that we understand this better than we actually understand how some biologics work. And you mentioned something very important at the beginning of this question. You mentioned that the patients who were benefiting from having an immunoregulator activated in their neck actually were also had the advantage of not having to be subjected to the side effects of the biologics, which are extremely significant. Biologics cause immunosuppression, and immunosuppression puts patients at risk of secondary infections, even cancer. And many of the biologics have black box warnings, which is the most serious side effect warning that the FDA issues. And so you're absolutely right. The fact that the patients are significantly better 75% of the time after 1 year is very, very significant on its own. But when you add in the benefit that this therapy of implanting a multivitamin size capsule under the neck muscles, that this therapy is also very, very safe and is active for 1 minute a day. When you put all that together, we're already seeing a tremendous interest and a tremendous appeal from the patient population. I wrote about all this in great detail in my book recently. The book is called The Great Nerve. It's available everywhere books are sold, as they say, and it's published by the Avery imprint of Penguin Random House. And I urge anyone who has questions about this to look at the book, The Great Nerve. And I'm very excited to talk to you about it because your listeners are those that potentially could benefit from understanding these possibilities. It won't apply to everybody. Some patients won't be eligible for this therapy, and some patients, as with any therapy, not every therapy works in every patient. But from where we sit today, starting a new era, this at least gives a large number of patients an additional option for a therapy someday if their physicians obviously recommend it and agree with that.
For sure, absolutely. Yeah. So we'll I'll probably look it up on Amazon and include the Amazon link in the show notes so that people can at least go check out the book if they want to. So a couple of other questions come to mind then. So the first one is, where do you see this going over the long term? Do you think this is going to become the standard of care for rheumatoid arthritis?
So I am not a futurist. I'm not a prophecy, but I think the data suggests there's a very good chance that will happen. When you have very expensive drugs with a high side effect profile, like the biologics that cost $100,000 a year in some cases, 50 or 75,000 in other cases, as opposed to implanting a device that can be done safely for a one-time cost of $50,000, which of course is less than a year of therapy. I think there's going to be tremendous pressure to look at ways to apply this therapy to as many patients as possible when it can be done safely, and when we know more about when we have a larger clinical experience to determine efficacy. I know that there will be additional trials for other conditions. Setpoint Medical has announced they will begin a clinical trial for multiple sclerosis. The data there from the laboratory are extremely interesting. We've seen in the animal models of multiple sclerosis, we've seen two things. One, you'd expect right away from what we've been talking about already. We've seen reduced inflammation in the animal model of MS. You'd expect that. That's what we're talking about here. But what was really important and a little bit surprising was that the vagus nerve stimulation, the neuroimmune modulation in these animals also increased remyelination, which means there's better function, because the damage in MS is caused by inflammation, which injures the myelin and disrupts the ability of the nerves to function or communicate. But when you accelerate remyelination, you accelerate the ability of the nerves to heal. And this has been a real problem in the clinic in treating MS patients. And the idea of accelerating remyelination with this device has generated tremendous interest. We've already seen successful clinical trials, small ones, but important ones, in patients with Crohn's disease and with ulcerative colitis. So when you put all those conditions together, should time going forward prove successful clinical trials leading to additional FDA labels for this device being implanted, yes, there's a good chance that the indications will broaden and that many, many patients will be treated. And finally, you frame the question as one of timing, and the simple response to that is, can you think of any condition where treating later in the disease is better than treating earlier? And the
No, of
simple
course
answer,
not.
of course not. So I think there's going to be a lot of interest, if not pressure, on trying to implant sooner in patients if the device continues to gain the interest it has and the data continue to grow. Because obviously, the sooner you can implant someone with a serious condition, the earlier comes the opportunity to prevent the longer term complications. All of this will have to be worked out in well-controlled, statistically valid, randomized clinical trials. That will take time, that will cost money, but there's a lot of interest from a lot of different groups, especially Setpoint Medical and the clinicians treating these patients. There's a tremendous interest in seeing this to go forward, and I think that is what will happen.
That's awesome. That's amazing. Yeah. So you answered already one of the other questions I was going to ask is, what about the other autoimmune conditions? You answered that question already. So if somebody's listening to this and they're thinking, I wonder if this would be something that I could consider today, what would the process look like? They would have to get a referral from their doctor, and then they'd have to come to New York and see you, or how would that all work?
I am not treating patients. They wouldn't come to New York to see me. The first thing they should do is check with their physician. Their physician has some resources available. First of all, the Setpoint Medical website has now been, since the FDA approval, as I said just a few days ago, and a big New York Times front page article last Friday. Since all of this news is broken, Setpoint now has a fully updated website. It has the clinical information for patients. It has the scientific background information, some of which I've been talking about, and it has information on the page for physicians and for healthcare providers. So that's a resource. If patients are in the greater New York area, my colleagues at Northwell Health have opened a new center for bioelectronic medicine. We announced that opening a couple of months ago in order to be fully prepared in expectation of this FDA announcement, which we fully expected. We are convening neurosurgeons and rheumatologists and gastroenterologists and neurologists and others interested in treating these patients. We have there's a website at the Center for Bioelectronic Medicine at Northwell Health. There's a phone number on that website with a patient navigator who can help patients find their way through the early steps of this. The device from Setpoint will be rolled out in the early months, in the next coming months, at a few specialized centers. You can imagine if there's a new device, a sort of a pioneering new way of doing something, that you roll the device out to specialized centers in order to maintain quality and expertise for the first patients, so they get the best care. In the long run, there will be a national rollout, and this will be broadly available over the next coming year or so. But in the first few months and the first half of next year, most of the therapy for this will be delivered through highly specialized centers around the United States, and all that information will be on the SetPoint medical website, and patients will be able to navigate to a place, hopefully close to them.
Cool. Yeah. Well, we'll definitely link that below then. So it sounds like, for your average everyday person, it's a little too soon, but at some point, they'll get there. And I take it that insurance is not really covering that kind of thing yet for the people that are doing it.
These are early days, and I'm not sure of the status of that. I'm not sure that's correct. I know that the FDA, during the clinical trials phase of the development of this technology, gave a status to the device, which is called a breakthrough designation, and that has important implications for insurance negotiations, which are going to be happening. When something comes on board that's totally new, it takes time for the new technology to be covered by insurance, but it doesn't take forever. And as I said before, you're talking about a therapy that one therapy for life will cost less than 1 year of the competing therapy. So in terms of the insurance company approach to this, they've been extremely supportive and extremely interested. If you look at the benefits that come to the patients, which the insurance companies are also very supportive of, they want their patients to do well as the financial benefits that come to the insurance companies and to the hospital systems. It's a win-win for everybody, frankly. So I think
I mean, it absolutely should be. I just bring that up because knowing, that it is a new thing, sometimes it takes a little while to adopt. So, but yeah, we'll definitely link to the website below so that anybody that is interested in it, that wants to explore it, or at least is curious about it, for the average person, like you said, it's probably maybe a little bit too soon, but at some point, sounds like this is going to become something that's going to be a lot more well-known. A lot more people will be talking about it. A lot more people will have heard of it. It'll be something that your doctor will have heard of, whereas right now, a lot of them probably haven't.
I think that may be true, but I think that there's more people that have heard of it than you would imagine. So there are billions of web impressions about the vagus nerve, and to give you an idea of how much I think pent-up demand there will be for this therapy for even the average patient, when SetPoint launched its clinical trial to enroll patients, they needed, as I said before, 242 patients in the clinical trial. They had almost 30,000 patients enter the portal and fill out a complicated series of questions in the portal to ask to participate in the trial. The demand for this is huge, and I think that the takeoff, the adoption of this, will actually be much faster than for some other than the uptake and adoption of some other early therapies. Time will tell. I could be wrong, but I think it's going to be a much more rapid adoption and uptake than people are thinking.
Yeah, it definitely could be. I mean, definitely sounds very revolutionary. Definitely sounds very useful for a lot of people, for sure. Absolutely. So anything else you want to share that we haven't talked about? Like I said, we'll link the resources. We'll link your book, The Great Nerve, below. We'll link the SetPoint website. Anything else that you want to share that we haven't talked about?
No, I would just only add that one chapter that might be particularly relevant based on what you and I've talked about today is the chapter called FAQs, and it's questions that patients can ask their doctors about everything we're talking about, and that chapter is really written for the patients to have a list of questions they might want to think about, but it's also written for the doctors and healthcare providers because the answers are geared for everybody. And I'm grateful that you had me on, and I hope that this helps get the word out so that people in need who may benefit for something like this will actually have access to it sooner rather than later.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for coming on and sharing it with us. It's obviously not something I would have known anything about. So it's interesting. I'm definitely going to have to research this more.
Well, thanks for having me on. It's great speaking with you.
Yeah, absolutely.